welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential of learning in the early years. Hello and welcome back to TTS Talking Early Years with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and my guest, Samantha Dholakia. And we've been talking about all sorts of really fascinating stuff around emotional regulation, self-regulation, co-relationships, and things that are really significant to how you and the children in your care are able to function and flourish in your environment. So in this last episode, Sam, we've talked about loads, and as we've said, we could probably have talked for days on this because it's not only fascinating but really powerful. So can we kind of pull together some practical ideas? I mean, we talked about one in the last episode, was when you were saying, sometimes it's good just to dance out some of that energy that children bring in, especially if it's positive or negative. But are there other things that we can do that really help children to regulate those emotions before we get on with our day or during our day, whenever we need it?
Absolutely. So if we're thinking about our early years children and we're thinking about their needs, a lot of the time our children are going to need higher energy kind of releases at some point during our day. And I think one of the things that I love about our approach, our behaviour balance approach, is that you can set that up in your setting. It doesn't need to be an additional thing, Yeah. We have our behaviour balance zones, but it doesn't really matter what you call it. You can have a Zen den, you can have a calm corner, whatever you want to call it. And it shouldn't just be in one place. It needs to be, because then you've got 30 kids lined up for that one place. It needs to be around your setting. It needs to be everywhere and completely accessible for all. So it's things like having different options out, and you might have some children who come in and they need that high energy. So I personally, as I said, I love a morning dance. I just put a little bit of fun music that I know my class are going to love on, and I get them to dance around with me, maybe pull some silly faces at each other, hop on the spot, jump around, touch their toes, do some things like that, get that body moving. Apart from anything, we're oxygenizing the brain. We're also, by moving up and down, jumping up and down, they're lymphocyzing, which is a really important part of kind of supporting the internal world. The whole movement aspect of it is there's a whole hours or more talk there. But what we really want to do is then bring that in. So, for example, if you've had your input and then you want to kind of let them free flow, have in place those tools for them to go to. So, for example, in one of our example baskets that we take in when we do training, we have things that you can pull. So they're like these tubes, and they make a really loud noise. And they go. You've probably seen them. When they go back in, that's the sound effect, guys. You're welcome. We also have things that they can like twiddle around, and if you do it really fast in the air, it makes a whooshing noise. I'm not going to make that one for you.
Cool.
But when we start to mix those sensory inputs, it's really great. The power of pulling and pushing is great, but the sound it makes is really rewarding. You get a little bit of a hit from that. So when we get to put those in place, children can go to them when they need it. We also use little signs or symbols or round P spots that you can get. They've got different activities on. So you might want a running one, you might want a skipping one, a hopping one, or a balance one, and children can go to the higher energy stuff and run it out, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, even put a sand timer in there, or electric timer if they prefer. So they just start to build awareness of what they need and when. And going back to what we were talking about with the emotion monsters, that's part of them understanding their process. That's part of them understanding their emotional journey. So then you can, we have our balance cards, and I always suggest that you do this with your class, is note down at the beginning of the year and check in, because things change, what makes them feel good.
Yeah, absolutely.
What makes them feel rubbish? What scares them? What excites them? What, all of those things. And we have these little cards that you can print out that you can just kind of add to. They get to draw a little picture and they write these things on, and you can write it for them, or you can do it all pictorially. But the idea is that they can go and they can grab their balance card and they can be like, okay, this is my feeling right now. Let me look at my little toolkit. What do I need? I'm going to go over to that part of the behaviour balance zone, and I'm going to grab that activity because look, I've got it. It's a go-to. Because when our brains are dysregulated, they can't think in that way.
And early on in their journey, as practitioners, you can spot that and support it. So if it's really early on and they're not able to say, this is how I feel, it's just like, I don't know, I just feel like this. Yeah. If we get really good at spotting that, we can say, in that kind of coaching way, I think, or it looks like, how about we? And of course, in early years, we've got the great benefit that the UIFS really supports outdoor play, which gives us a whole other space, which often Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 don't have access to. I think the other thing that's important to pick up on what you said, which is really useful, is the idea that sometimes when we've got these little physical children that are learning to manage their proprioception, their gross motor development, that will struggle to do things like sit down for long periods of time, then to go and sit on a chair and do a sedentary activity. Making sure that indoors isn't all about that sedentary stuff. So you're talking about those spots on the floor or zones that you can go into. So if we look at how the typical, if there is such a thing, and there isn't, so I don't know why I said it, common balance, the typical 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old develops, then they are not sedentary creatures. If you describe your own children at home at that age, especially me, I had 3 boys very close together, and they were not sedentary in any way, shape or form for more than, well, unless they were asleep, they weren't sedentary.
Yes, I was going to say, there's one time a day.
Only one. So the thought of them being in an educational setting and then sitting still for hours at a time. So we need to make the internal environment that we create for early years children also contain opportunities for gross motor movement and physicality. Yes. And like you said, that doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be like a tennis court in the middle of your classroom or a climbing frame, or it could be. I have been in some early years classrooms that do have climbing frames inside, but things that can get you jumping, running. Again, I've talked for other reasons, worked with a setting where they hung some hula hoops from the ceiling and they had some ping pong balls that they'd wrapped in old chiffon scarves, and they were throwing them through the hula hoop, and that was also great for balance and proprioception, hand-eye coordination. But it was high energy, big movement, and it was a small space, and nobody died. It was useful stuff that made it a physical space.
I love that. I love that idea of the hula hoops on the ceiling. I think it's great. Another thing that's really interesting, one of the settings that we've been working with, they've just put in some bars, and they've got things hanging from the ends of the bars, but the children can hang off of them. They're not climbing bars.
Climbing bars
has been modelled and talked about, but they are just to hang, and hanging is one of the best things that we can do, for a whole host of reasons. So they just can hang at different levels, and I think that's such a great one as well, because your whole body's kind of holding and tensing, and then that release. It feels so good for young people.
Interestingly, another setting that I worked with had climbing holds, but only from the kind of floor. There were 2 levels, so if you stood on the lowest level, you couldn't get anything to hold on. It was across one small piece of wall, and all the children, when they got to it, crossed the wall rather than walked on the floor, and just that 30 seconds of climbing, and they loved it. Another setting I worked with had the famous Swedish furniture store unit with holes in it, and they asked their children to move between one area and another by sliding through one of the boxes at the bottom. It was fixed to the wall securely, and that was important, but the children didn't walk around it. They slid through the hole, and they loved it, and everybody did it. But even just that action of getting down, moving through, is getting your body going, and also makes them love the space, because it's just like a little bit magical. And there's a nursery in Wrexham called Homestead, and they've done the Narnia thing where they've got a proper vintage wardrobe, and with the bottom drawer is pulled out, and it's a permanent step, but you open the doors and it covers a doorway. So you open the doors and you actually walk through the wardrobe to get into the next room.
Oh my goodness, that sounds amazing.
An amazing space. But again, the children just loved it. And obviously you've got to be careful with fingers and all that kind of stuff and risk assess. And I'm not suggesting everybody buys a vintage wardrobe. There are little things that you can do. Another setting I worked with, they had a bit of nylon washing line in between two units. And they'd got the leg of a pair of tights, but they'd gone like proper 70 denier, gonna last type tights with a tennis ball in the bottom, tied. So basically the washing line was about top of head height of the children. The tight is tied on, so it slips backwards and forwards. And they were just holding the ball and throwing it to each other because it was on the washing line. It didn't go anywhere. Yeah. And they just grabbed it. And then they brought in some big fat tennis rackets. And they were whacking the ball backwards and forwards in the middle of their not too massive space. Really popular, really physical. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got injured. And again, I thought it was just a lovely idea of how you can bring elements of physicality into a space, and really popular. Way more popular than spotting signs of autumn with a magnifying glass from a tough spot.
And I think, just knowing that you can be creative with it.
Absolutely.
There is no right or wrong. It is just, what do your children respond to, like anything. And I think, modeling, one of the things that I think is absolutely vital is teaching them how to, modeling it, using the spaces yourself. And we used to do this when I was a class teacher, and we used to literally start every session with me and my additional educator going around and playing with all the things, and all the children would be chomping at the bit to get to everything. I was like, come on, like, you've had your turn now, get out of the way, and I think we forget that actually these other things all need modeling too. So if we can model how to access all of these, I guess they are emotionally regulating activities, as well as the coordination element, the physical development element. If we can model that, then the children are going to have such a better experience when it's their turn to have a go.
Yeah, and I think what we're saying is lots of them are win-win-win. So they're not just about emotional regulation, which is really important. They've got loads of other benefits that children will get in terms of their physical development as well as their emotional development. And as we've said a number of times, this being able to recognize how you feel and articulate how that is a complex process, especially for very little children, to find the words to recognize the feelings. So the more work we can do on that, the more we can make that a priority, then the more equipped they're going to be. And I think the other thing that's also, for us as practitioners, the job is really stressful, especially post-pandemic. It's really stressful. You've got all sorts of requirements that are put upon you. Young little children are emotionally draining because they are needy and they're full of joy, and then they're full of sorrow, and they're full of emotional dysregulation. So for you as an adult, it's a really hard job. It's a hugely rewarding job, which is why we both do it, but it's a really hard job. And sometimes it's that training of yourself that when things are going to pot, for want of a better phrase, then that idea of managing your own emotion first before you start to manage the emotions of your children.
Yeah.
It sounds dead easy, but it's actually quite hard to do, especially if somebody's like watching you teach and it's all going wrong. Once I was in supporting a practitioner, and I was hoping I was being really supportive, and they had set up a dentist in their role play, and the children weren't really engaging with the dentist play very much because they'd set up a dentist because the children had poor dental health, and therefore they hadn't been to the dentist, so they didn't really know what to do in the dentist. But they had one of those massive toothbrushes that you can get from the dentist. And while I'm chatting to the teacher and we're doing this activity, one boy is chasing another boy around the perimeter. And again, I could feel the stress in this teacher. And rather than just say, like, stop what you're doing, let's sort it out, she was trying not to appear like she wasn't in control, but whilst also trying to alert through telekinesis the other member of staff that was in the room, who was engaged with another group of children and missed it.
And we've all had those moments, haven't we?
Where at some point then you crack and you're like, right, stop everybody, stop where you are, come here, bring that. And that's the bit where actually.
And then all the children get emotional whiplash.
Well, they do. And
you were fine a second ago.
And emotional whiplash is a thing where suddenly I'm happily just playing away in the small world, and then you break through my little bubble with, which then panics me, frightens me. Is it me you're talking to? Might it be me? So we're all human. We've all done this a million times, probably more with our own kids than we have other people's. But that idea of that emotional regulation as an adult, so it's equally as important for us to do all the things that we're saying we need to do with the children.
More important. Even more important.
Get into that classroom with your TA before anybody else comes in, or with the other people who are in your nursery, or if you're a childminder by yourself, put on whatever you like dance to and jump up and down. And if you're feeling really fed up, it's that idea that you would say, right, I feel really fed up. What's going to get me out of this? Which will often be the children. But, it's proactively doing things like that. And of course, there are more formal, structured things that lots of settings will talk about, like children's yoga, meditation. What are your thoughts around those?
I was going to say, I think this is where we get the traditional kind of, you have to breathe, you have to do the stretches and things like that. And actually, yes, you do have to do all of those things. But I think we need to, first of all, have a bit of a cognitive reframe. Because ultimately, what you're thinking is generating your emotions a lot of the time. Yeah. So if you're still thinking those thoughts even while running, it's not gonna shift too much. And I think you need to start. And you said, the children often get us out of it. We want to provide, as practitioners, all of us. We want them not to be our saving thought. We want them to get the best from us all of the time. So we don't want to wait for them to come through the door to shift. What we want to do is shift it first, so they come through the door and get the best us, not the gradually shifting upwards us. So I think yes, yoga is fantastic, but know your need. If you're I'm a very high energy person, as I said. If I am feeling a low vibrating energy, a low mood, yoga won't shift me. I know it won't shift me. So I need something bigger first. Yeah. And then I can access the yoga. But if I would do 20 seconds or 30 seconds on a fast paced run first, or a minute, that's going to shift me more, because I need to change what I'm thinking. I need to, it all needs to shift. So, and we talk a lot about the 90-second gap, and having time to breathe. Now, of course, if you've got a child chasing another child with a giant toothbrush, you might not have 90 seconds.
You might have 90 seconds.
You might not want 90 seconds for that, but providing children are safe physically and emotionally, there is nothing wrong with us as adults taking a break before reacting to something. So if you can see a child doing something and it's niggling you, because it does, we're all human, and sometimes we're like, stop that. Turning your back on that child for a second, talking to another one, or just taking a big breath and okay, little Sam, I can see that you really want to smack so-and-so on the head with that. We're going to walk this way first, and having that ability to feel your feelings bubbling up, rather than kind of allowing that to happen and then exploding, thinking, right, give myself a gap so that I can pause first, which is the hardest thing to do. But practice makes progress. That's the difference.
I was going to say, I think the more rehearsed you get at this as an adult, the more naturally it comes. So you'll get a point, hopefully, where you don't have to think about it as much. It just becomes a natural response. But in the beginning, because we're all emotional, sentient beings, it can be challenging. Nobody's saying it's easy, but with practice, it does get easier. Which is a perfect way to end, which is almost where we began when we talked about the fact that if we can get our children into the habits of recognizing where they are and their emotional barometer and doing positive things about it to either change it or not, depending on where they are, the more practice they get, the better at it they'll become. Sam, it has been both fascinating and a pleasure to talk to you. They've been really interesting podcasts. We will make sure that in the podcast notes, we can direct people to where they can find more about you and the work that you do. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to our guest Sam for joining us and providing such interesting and valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Sam Dholakia. And if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget you can sign up via the link in the episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your setting and links to relevant resources.